It is the Anfield Wrap. It's Neil Atkinson back in the studio. Exciting times indeed. Joined by John Gibbons, Beth Lindop, and by Fuad Hasan. Beth from ESPN, and fabulous to have her in as well. We are brought to you by Peloton, the official digital fitness partner of Liverpool FC. John Gibbons, how's the Peloton group going?
Good, yeah. Cara was leading the charge on Friday, getting everyone in a group together on 6 o'clock, which was good. And yeah, people are just enjoying it. Like, people talk to me about it all the time. I was down on the front, some films, some stuff. Some guy was like, "Oh, you alright today?" He was like, "It's good, the Peloton, innit?" He was like, "I've got it in my office at home." I was jealous. But people out in Australia, people say, "You're missing the Peloton." I'd say Peloton is the thing that people speak to me most now.
It's quite interesting that's what they've gone with. You sent the survey out to subscribers, and I went through the comments, and there was a few in there about the Peloton and saying, "Will you do a show on the Peloton?" So I might try and host this show if they win the league on the Peloton. Not the week after they've won the league, I want to be clear. I want it to be another reason to win the league. So not the week directly after they've won the league, because I intend to be drunk. And one should not Peloton in that condition. Absolutely. You've got to take it deadly seriously. But I'm wondering could I do an hour-long Anfield Wrap show whilst doing an hour-long cycle on the Peloton all the way through. I'm not quite sure what we'll do with the microphone, but we'll work on that later.
Why stop at an hour?
Well, the show tends to be an hour. I'm not Joe Rogan.
I just think you should just do a 24-hour...
In so many ways, I'm not Joe Rogan.
A 24-hour Peloton extravaganza.
I mean, that's easy for you to say, Ben.
I was thinking an hour's a fair way. You'd have to do one of them scenic ones where you...
That's what I'm going through the streets of Bosnia.
You can't have Ben shouting at you when you're trying to host the show.
I don't want that, because it'd be disruptive for the show and all that sort of stuff. No, I think it's a scenic ride, but I do it all the way through. So I'm on it, hunched over here with the microphone somehow, and we just see if we can do it.
This feels a bit like 18-19, where I said I'd dress up as the Premier League trophy if you won the league. Alas, they did not.
No, so
that season.
But I want to be clear. I'm very convinced they're going to win the league. I'm really putting my head. I'm putting my neck on the line here, but I'm happy to do it.
Good.
So we'll work that out.
You could attach a mic to the top of that, surely.
Oh, I think Andy's capable of anything. Don't need to worry about that.
Clip-ons, it'll be fine.
We'll sort that out. So that's something to look forward to, and we are very pleased to be partnered by Peloton, and that is to come. I'll have to get a bit fitter before then as well. But I like the idea of a target of a goal as champions, and we'll go from there. Listen, coming up as well, we're going to have a conversation about Hillsborough Law with Debbie Caine and Elkan Abrahamson. That is to come as well. We're going to break this show into little chunks. We're going to talk about the international break and what went on for the players first and foremost. Then we're going to get stuck into Everton and Fulham, because I see them as a back-to-back thing, and I suspect the Liverpool manager does as well. And then we're going to have a chat about Malaga and multi-club ownership, everything you need in the Anfield Wrap this week, coming all the way through. But we will start off with the international break update. I'll go to you first on it, John. It's worth seeing the players. Van Dijk plays a lot, Salah plays a lot. We're not necessarily in favour of that, but it feels no bad thing. Jota got some time, Nunez got some time, and especially Gakpo got some time, and also that Diaz got some positive moments. Yeah,
the Gakpo one's really interesting to me, because it just shows how hard these things are, and how tough they are for managers, and how you're making a gamble, often based on a few days sort of here or there, really. And he got a bit of stick for the manager, for bringing him on against PSG, and he was just sort of a passenger. And listen, that happens. Managers are judged partly by the substitutions, and he come on, and it was, effectively playing with 10. But I think these decisions are harder than I think sometimes as fans we sort of make out, really. And you've got the players telling you he's ready. You've got the sports science people saying he can probably do 15-20 minutes here, or sort of whatever it is. And then he's been such a big player for us this season. I think there's always an element of, well, put him on and see how he does. And he didn't do well, and then wasn't much use in the final. But then 4 days later, he's playing brilliantly for Holland, and it just shows, how close these things can sort of be. Sometimes he wasn't out for a huge length of time, so you shouldn't have thought he'd have been sort of too rusty or anything like that. So I think it is hard, and it's tough knowing the exact right moment to bring these players back, especially when you've got big games. It's not like you could think, we'll just give him 10 at home to Southampton or whatever at the end of a game where we were 3-1 up, I think, by that point, or certainly 2-1, and see how he goes. There was no feeling his way in. If you don't use him, then imagine if you hadn't used him in either game, and then he'd have put that performance in for Holland.
But it's also a subs point, John, to be fair. The other thing I will point out is that I've seen Liverpool players absolutely flying, well, footballers full stop, but Liverpool players flying for fitness who get dropped into a game in the middle of nowhere and just struggle to get the pace of it.
Yeah.
So I think that I've got some sympathy. I think where my sympathy sort of dissipates a little bit is he does what he does against Paris Saint-Germain, and then the manager whacks him on again quite early against Newcastle. But you could say, well, he might be further along the process.
Yeah, you might think, well, he's benefited from that, and he wasn't the only one who came on against PSG at home and struggled. So like Curtis Jones, he's been a really good sub for us this season, really struggled as well, and so he might think that they're mitigating for that. But anyway, the point is, it was good to see him playing well, Gakpo, and him contributing for the Dutch national team, and hopefully he'll be fit and raring to go. And the Diaz one's really interesting for me because he has a period at Liverpool where he can't buy a goal, and then he scores up after 30 seconds, I think, for his national team, doesn't he? Scores in both games and against good opposition as well. The early ones against Paraguay, he scores against Brazil, who I know is struggling a little bit at the moment, but it's still Brazil, and so he's scoring against good teams. And so you think, well, why is that? Is it because is there a bit more pressure on him in a good way for the national team? He thinks I'm the sort of main man, whereas for Liverpool, that's maybe not the case. Maybe it's Salah, or maybe it's a little bit more spread out. If you sort of want to be generous, are they playing him in a different way? Or is it just one of those coincidental things where a bit of a change of scenery and suddenly he's scoring? I think it proves to me he can get goals, and he proved that sort of earlier in the season. And the two really nice, the one against Brazil is a lovely goal. Yeah. I think a really, really nice strike. And so you see him score that. It's a Diaz type goal. It's a little bit earlier than what the goalkeeper thinks. And so I think it's a good thing that Diaz is scoring those goals, but I think it's interesting that he goes away and suddenly he's banging, and why that is, I'm not quite sure really. I'd be relying on someone doing a bit more analysis on his average position and what's sort of expected of him in these games, but I think it does show that he's got goals in him and he is capable, and that is a positive, I guess for Liverpool. But it's just whether we can replicate those scenarios that are able to get in those positions.
Well, we did at the start of the season, is what I would say, and that was the Fuad. Jota and Nunez get some time as well. Jota also gets a positive moment or two playing for Portugal, which is no bad thing. I think the main thing to sort of take is that all of Liverpool's attacking options are in shape. They're a match fit. They're playing football matches. You can't look away from that at this stage of the season. That's only good news.
Yeah, totally. And I think if there was a player who could have really done with that, it was Diogo Jota. Just because I think he's had a weird few weeks where he's got a lot of criticism, I think, and rightly so in terms of the output. I think you can never question the lack of effort, I think, with Liverpool's forward line or any of these Liverpool players, because the standards are always there, I think. But yeah, it's sort of the perfect time for him to come in. It would have been good if it was a few weeks earlier, but if we can use this, because he has been a player where once he gets one or two, he does go on a little bit of a streak, and he can really sort of essentially define parts of seasons. I always think back to the 22, around the League Cup against Arsenal, where that it felt like for a month or two he was kind of unstoppable and really just sort of dragged Liverpool through games. Not saying we quite need that, but it feels like this is a springboard for that. It feels like he can sort of kick on, and he seems like a player who's always quite hard on himself. I think it was the PSG press conference that he did, where he was quite self-critical about his season so far and everything. And I think this is something where it's quite clear the manager doesn't really fancy him or Nunez, but till the end of the season, we need one of them, I think, to really kind of make a claim for that spot. Now that Gakpo's back, that could change things a little bit, but I think this will do no harm for Jota in terms of getting himself further in the conversation to start.
I think on the attacking options, Beth, I think first and foremost it's good to have the highest possible standards. That's what the Liverpool manager's been about all season. One of my takeaways, though, at the moment is we very much ended up getting on the back of our attacking options, and we sort of perceived that the manager might be as well. I'd rather have ours than City's or Arsenal's. All the way through, when you want to go through to all six of them, Arsenal ended up with Trossard, Martinelli. They've had to use Nweri this season. It looks really, really exciting. Foden, Doku and Savinho at the minute don't feel like they can buy a goal. Between the three of them, Grealish has not been impressive for City. Looked all right yesterday when he came on, but Grealish is not, it's fair to say the Manchester City manager doesn't fancy him. So we're in this situation where we are top of the league, we are 12 points clear, we have scored more goals than anyone else, but we are all sort of wondering and and ahhing about the attacking options. I think that's not a bad thing in one sense, as I say, about having the highest standards. But I think it's also just sort of worth remembering that these are the players who brought us to this point as well.
Yeah, I think actually the international break, usually by the time it gets to the March international break, you're dreading it really, aren't you? And it feels like it stalls momentum. But I actually think, this season for Liverpool, it maybe come at the right time, because I think, like you say, that there's been maybe a little bit of revisionism, not just from Liverpool fans externally as well, but almost off the back of those disappointing results against PSG and Newcastle, almost sort of trying to do down the quality of this Liverpool squad and what they have achieved, and with a real emphasis on those attacking options. And, obviously they haven't delivered over the past few weeks, but for 7 months of the season, in one way or another, whether it's been every week or whether it's been popping up with moments, they have. And like you say, that's why Liverpool are in the position that they're in. And so I do sort of think, in a way, this international break has maybe been quite beneficial for the likes of Luis Diaz to go and play somewhere where he's maybe seen more as the main man, and where he maybe feels a little bit unshackled from all of the, I don't want to say loads of negativity, because it really was only a couple of weeks of patchy results, and even then, it was a narrow defeat to PSG, having played pretty well against them at Anfield. The Newcastle game obviously was very disappointing, but I think a little bit of change of scenery for a lot of these players might actually have been a good thing, and to have had a little bit of time to regroup and get away, and now sort of refocus ahead of what promises to be a really sort of decisive run of games.
Without knowing too much about the Chiesa fitness aspect, John, I sort of feel as though when I look at those direct rivals, Arsenal and City, before I even go lower, I feel as though Chiesa and Elliott would have got more time playing for them over the course of the last sort of 4 months or 5 months or so, when things have been going wrong for them and the pressure's come on in those attacking areas. I think as I say, I'm all for look at every area of the pitch and work out what you can improve, and we know it's going to be a big summer transfer window, and I'm saying this without the context of the contracts, but I think it is just sort of worth dwelling on the fact that this is an area of the pitch where Liverpool, for the majority of the season, have just been quite significantly ahead of the direct rivals.
Yeah, and it's helped us massively, hasn't it? Because when we have picked up, injuries, other players have been able to sort of step up, and Diaz lights up the first part of the season and then maybe drifts out of it. Obviously, Salah's been the most consistent and the most phenomenal forward, but and you see Núñez having his moments.
Gakpo had a good winter.
Gakpo was fantastic, a really, really good run, and even the other two, who've if you had to set out your targets for them in the summer, the two who've maybe fallen short of that, because Núñez, you sort of never know, and he's had his moments, and so Núñez has probably performed more or less as expected in a way, in a very sort of roundabout way, Darwin Núñez style. But I think the two who've been disappointing in different ways for what we've got out of them is Jota and Chiesa. But then Jota gets the big goal at Forest, which is a really big point, I think, in terms of our season. And Chiesa, you see him when he comes off the bench in the final and scores a goal. Looks like he has got more to give. He's just not quite been able to convince the manager for one reason or another to give him more opportunities. And so I think all of them can hold their heads up and say that they contributed for Liverpool this season when they've been able to, and some of them would like to have been able to a little bit more. But I think they have all, they have all had moments at least, and in other cases, many, and great games and things like that. And that's before, like you see, we even get onto the attacking midfielders and someone like Elliott, who's been caught a little bit between two stools, and I thought it's been a little bit unlucky, but he's had a really bright month. The minutes that he's sort of been onto the pitch, and so, like you say, we've scored the most goals and we created the most chances, and the reason for that is the sort of attacking options, and the manager might choose to shuffle them a little bit over the summer, but I think that'll be more to do with suitability to what he wants to do than it is quality. Quality-wise, we're ahead of everyone else, and like you say, Neil, that's where we are.
I think there's something, at least I've struggled to sort of get my head around since sort of the Mane, Fabinho, Salah kind of front three era, if you like, where they were just nailed on to start every week. It was a unit of three really, and then we had the fourth occasionally. And what's changed is it's now become a unit as a whole, hasn't it? And when it becomes 5 players, 6 players, you're relying on players to be out of form, and the key is you're hoping that others would come in, and the timing kind of aligns where one dips out just as someone else comes in and scores a few goals. And I think, if you look at the overall thing of that, and if you kind of zoom out, that feels like players are kind of not really hitting the numbers that consistently. But it is about when they're in form and who else is in form in that spell, because you can only rely on a Mo Salah, to be as consistent as he is. But that's not 99% of forwards. And it doesn't matter how good you are, you aren't going to have forwards like that. And I think that's just how Liverpool's evolved, how probably the modern kind of game has evolved for the top sides who want to compete on all fronts, that you are relying on your forwards to come in and out. It's not like we've seen huge parts of this season. Obviously, injuries have played a part in that at certain moments, but there's not really been a nailed down starter, other than Mo Salah on either side. He had his team that he went with earlier on the season, and that kind of changed once he saw a bit more of them. But I think, definitely for me, it's about getting your head around the timing of when players are in form and out of form. And I think that could sometimes change our perception, can't it? Because, Diaz is a second top scorer in the league for us on 9 goals. And, I would not have thought that, just purely from memory. And Gakpo's there, contributing as well. And I think we've got to sort of have that patience a little bit with them, because, they are kind of designed to come in and out at certain moments.
Others to point out is that Konate, Beth only does 45 minutes, Gravenberch. So, yeah, Van Dijk ends up doing 210. He's got an extra time in there. But Konate, Gravenberch has the full break off and away from football as well. Konate only does 45 minutes. In terms of Liverpool's spine, Szoboszlai obviously very involved at Hungary, but in terms of Liverpool's spine, it's no bad thing, I think, rest for Konate and Gravenberch in sort of, in contrast to the attacking options.
Yeah, I think Gravenberch's the big one, isn't it? I mean, he was outstanding for 2/3 of the season, and he's just sort of dropped off, as have a number of players over the past few weeks. And I don't think that's necessarily a coincidence that when he's not been playing quite as well, Liverpool haven't. I think he's been so good, but you do have to remember he's only 22, and this is a massive step up for him in terms of the responsibility he's being tasked with this season compared to last. So I think for him, just obviously I hope what he had to withdraw with wasn't too serious, but when you hear that he's returning to Liverpool, you do sort of think actually that is no bad thing. And I think for him, just having a little bit of a rest and a reset could be really beneficial. I think Konate, again, has looked... He does this thing, Konate, doesn't he, where he'll be doing really well, he gets an injury, and then I think it takes him a little while to find his rhythm. And I think we saw that the last few weeks before the international break, really. So I think for him, again, having a little bit of rest, bit of time training, getting back up to speed ahead of the derby again is no bad thing.
Right back aside, Beth, it's actually a really injury-free squad. It's just ironic the fact that there's different ways to be massively undermined by injuries. 3 sprinkled through a squad feels pretty manageable. 3 who would be your first, second and third choice to play right back, therefore makes you go, oh God, what are we going to do at right back? There's some talk, you might have seen it on the aggregator site with John Gibbons' blog. Where's the blog, John?
None of them linked to it,
of course. Well, how could they? There is.
Did you get a medal, by the way, or like a colour for how reliable you are?
No, I haven't monitored it properly, to be honest with you. I was trying to write an essay last night, and if anything, it was a distraction.
You're next on the line, though, like mine with the peloton on this one. You've never been aggregated before, and you may never be aggregated again.
What tier do you think I am?
I think we're going to find out.
Yeah, basically, yeah. If Arne Slot rubbishes me tomorrow,
rubbishes you in the press conference,
name checks you,
then I'm tier 4.
I think that could be that's in your future. It's a lot of pressure. Yeah. So Bradley may be back in training. We don't know.
Listen, I know. Don't be rubbishing me already.
But I think the point being is that it's an injury-free squad, Beth. I think it's valid off the back of the 2 games that we got to see against Paris Saint-Germain and Newcastle to ask whether or not it's a fit and sharp squad. I think there's an interesting little comparison, which is that no side had a comparable February. Liverpool, in the end, if they do lift this title, they'll have won it in that February, in those 15 days. That's when they'll have done the business. The flip side of that, though, is the only team that had a comparable February, City. And if you actually look at their results and performances against Brighton and Forest just before that break, they were not at their sharpest, looked a lot better second half yesterday against Bournemouth. The point being, the question for Liverpool isn't whether or not they've got in a good position for selection. It's the fitness and the sharpness of the players at this stage of the campaign. Yeah,
I think just the juxtaposition between how busy February was compared to how sort of sparse March was, and I just don't think that really helped them. And I think was maybe a little bit similar to last season when they obviously had all of those injuries and they'd sort of defied expectation to do really, really well. And it wasn't actually until a few weeks after that, when players started coming back, that the sort of the toll that had taken sort of became evident. And I think maybe that's what we saw a little bit in March, because they did so well in the February. And it was almost like then it caught up with
I thought on that, Beth, even watching Bournemouth versus Manchester City yesterday, I thought you saw that with Bournemouth.
Yes,
that those Bournemouth players, there was an injury crisis in January, February, they kept going. And then watching them second half yesterday, they just didn't have a gear to go to. And that reminded me of Liverpool last season, that idea where you think you've got some options, you think you've got some players back, you think you've had a bit of a rest.
Yeah.
But actually those lads who have been in the red for ages, it's hit them now, not when they were in the red, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And then I also think when you throw into the mix of the mental sides of things, because it was a really tough week. It was a really tough week for Liverpool. Losing to PSG in the way that they did, I thought they actually did pretty well, bar extra time when PSG I think were the better team, but I thought they did pretty well at Anfield, and then to go out of that competition and then only a few days after that to lose out on a trophy, I just think mentally they all looked a little bit drained, and I think that maybe translated to some of the physical aspects as well. So yeah, I think it was a tough week. I think they weren't fit. They weren't fit, but they weren't sharp. They weren't quite on the game. And I think hopefully now they know that the end is in sight. They know exactly how many games they've got to play between now and the end of the season, and hopefully that'll allow them to refocus.
There's two ways of looking at this, Fuad. They've got this little run now where they've got two games pretty close together, back to back, Wednesday to Sunday, and then from there it's a week a game. Flip side of that though is they've actually arguably had a week prior to Wednesday, no game at the weekend. He might have allowed a couple of them a little bit more time, but international travel's not an excuse now for Wednesday. I think it's very, Wednesday and then into Sunday. He is effectively now got, if we just almost see these two as a double-headed, if you know what I mean. He's almost just got a week to prepare everything now to the end of the season. Tiredness, I don't think will cut as a reason for underperformance.
No, totally, and there's a very clear kind of singular goal now, which should focus everyone. We've seen this. We've seen the side kind of be focused like that and be getting that groove before. So that should kind of speak for itself. And yeah, you're right that the gap is really nice in terms of getting to Wednesday after an international break. I can't remember that happening before, really, to be honest, where it always feels like you're seeing, right, who's not jet lagged, who's able to walk, who can do a few minutes.
Who's been to Bolivia?
Yeah, exactly. There's none of that. Hopefully, yeah, McAllister. There's no excuse for McAllister's legs. Hopefully this time. But yeah, it's great, and I think that's what at the end of the day, this coach is here to do exactly that, and he hasn't had that time on the training pitch really with them for a while. It's probably mainly just been recovery, and you're kind of going game from game, and you're just thinking on that terms. But now he had time to plan for this block essentially. The players have come back. He's really not got the injury kind of issues that we may have had earlier on in the season. So there's everything kind of in, all the tools are there for him and for the team, and I sort of back the senior figures we have in this squad who've kind of been there and done that, to also sort of supplement that and make sure that we are straight away into this groove of, right, we know what we've got to do here. The old cliche of every game's a cup final. I want them to kind of go and not sort of limp to the finishing line here, really, really go for it.
Yeah, and the Everton game is a chance to make a big step towards that. I can't sort of quite figure out whether it's a good thing to come back to the derby or not, but I think I've landed on it being a positive, because I think we have struggled a little bit when there's been big breaks to get our fluidity going and get our passing going. But, I mean, derbies aren't like that anyway. And so I think the idea of Wednesday being a lovely game of football with loads of great, passing moves and stuff like that doesn't tend to happen. It's going to be a sort of a bit of a dogfight. It's going to be sort of second balls. And so the idea to sort of focus on that and focus on the fact that we should have energy, and so that there shouldn't be anyone, like you said, with any excuse of not being there for they should be quicker to the second balls or anything like that. They shouldn't have, Newcastle felt like they just had a bit more energy than us in the middle of the park, after a tough run, whereas for this one, they should have plenty in the legs, is what you'd say. And so we might not be quite at our fluid best in terms of from an attacking point of view, because that's what we've tended to see after these breaks. But good luck trying to get that in a derby anyway. What I think we should see and what we will see is a lot of fight. I think it will be sort of a physical game, but we've got tough players. They're the good players, but they're robust and strong as well. I think just sort of getting on top of them and showing a real determination, like you say, Fuad, to get this done, and a real show determination to themselves, to the fans, and to everyone outside. You'll be looking at this and thinking, well, let's see how they do after this break. Obviously, Arsenal play first, which is a bit of an interesting dynamic, but whatever happens in that game, all eyes will be on Anfield on Wednesday night, and there's a chance to show everyone that we're not just winning it, we're winning it as soon as possible.
He's had days to work with them, John, since getting back, as said. It's interesting, Liverpool and Everton both asked to move it from the talk around it, pull it forward today to Tuesday. I think Everton in particular end up in a situation where they've got a Wednesday evening at Anfield. They're not going to travel, is what I would say. But they've got a Wednesday evening at Anfield, and then they've got Arsenal on a Saturday 12:30. And we know teams don't like Wednesday evenings and then Saturday 12:30s. Liverpool were happy to have it on Tuesday as well. Liverpool are getting Fulham at the end of a long week. Fulham Tuesday to Sunday turnaround. Liverpool Wednesday to Sunday. Not as bad as Everton's situation that they've ended up in. And Fulham obviously had the cup game at the weekend, which didn't go very well for them. It could be that sharpens them up a little bit. You could end up driving yourself a bit mad at this point if you're not careful. The one thing I would say, though, John, is that it's back to the idea of you can't ask for any more time to work with them before the derby. You've got that. Yes, it's an Everton side in good nick. They're off the back of 4 draws, is what I would point out. Only 1 defeat under Moyes in the league. That was his first game. They've conceded, though. None of these draws are 0-0s. And I think from Liverpool's point of view, remembering that going into the game with that sort of level of positivity, this is an Everton side that you should be scoring against. They scored 2 at Goodison Park against them.
Yeah, and it's a very different occasion to that Goodison Park one as well, isn't it? Goodison Park, it was the last Merseyside derby there. It was everything that they wanted to throw at it, and it was a tough game for a lot of reasons, not least that Liverpool didn't play particularly well, but all the things around that won't be the case at Anfield. And listen, I'm not saying that they're not going to be not bothered, because it's still a derby. They'll still want to play well, and they'll be aware that there'll be fans coming to Anfield that they want to put on a decent show for, but it's not the same as the Goodison one. It's not sort of everything round that. It's Liverpool trying to win the league and Everton trying to do the best to at least delay it, and that's a completely different narrative. And I think if you can get on top in games like that, then Everton trying to find sort of the energy for that is different. And so I think it'll be tough, but I can't see it being anywhere near as tough as the game at Goodison Park. And like you say, they did actually, they were a centre-half's wonder strike away from winning that game for everything that went on within it, and whether they deserved it or what. They did sort of have the game won, and then found a way, or Everton found a way, maybe a better way of putting it, to sort of get something from it. And so the good thing about this Liverpool team is that they've always got goals in them, whether they're playing well or not. You're watching the final, I think we could play for 3 years and not score it, and then suddenly a sub comes on and the ball's in the back of the net. And so we do tend to find a way. And I fancy us to find a way on Wednesday, and then I think we'll play better on Sunday, because I think it's the second game back from the break. They'll be in a little bit more rhythm. I take your points on Fulham and it being hard to see how it goes. And there's times where you've seen teams play, the pressure's off and stuff like that. I sort of suspect that the cup game will knock it out to them a little bit.
I think the pressure's off, John. I think for Fulham, it's a funny week where they will look at this table at the minute and feel like we can qualify for Europe through that. He picks a funny team, Silver. I think he picks a team when he's got one eye on the game's coming. So I don't think they will be, that idea of all the pressure's off. I don't think that will be that. I think that helps us, by the way. I think they'll be going into Craven Cottage thinking we could really do with winning our home games here between now and the end of the season, because if we do, we'll finish top 8 and we'll play European football.
Well, there's a big week for them, isn't there? And obviously they've got a game against Arsenal, which makes it sort of quite interesting. And depending on what they get there, and then depending on what the other teams get, there's no one in that. I did the top 6 show with Mo last week, which is available for video subscribers, and it was interesting because once you get out of the top 5, or even some of the top 5, if we're honest, but once you get out of there, it's hard to make a convincing argument for any of them to sort of go on a big run and sort of grab that place. Really, there's different reasons why other teams might sort of fall away. I said I fancy Brighton to finish top of them, and then I didn't think they were great at the weekend at all against Forest. They go out on penalties. I thought they looked a bit frightened sort of throughout, really, and so whether that's just sort of Forest thing because they beat them 7-0 earlier in the season, I don't know. But I think a group of them will feel like that there's something to grab. But I just think if Wednesday goes well, I really fancy Liverpool at Craven Cottage, and I think Wednesday will go well.
I think this is, it's two factors to this right now, Beth. There is the idea of feeling like you're building a little bit of momentum. We've got to proceed, I think, off the basis of the fact that Arsenal are getting 6, because anything else, would just be a bonus. It's the best way we've done it all season. I think you look at this side, you go back to that February run, you go back to when they were looking at Bournemouth and Brentford and Nottingham Forest all together as away games, and they grit the teeth and they found their way through. I feel as though in loads of ways, the good thing about Wednesday is I want the pressure on. I feel as though if the pressure's on, I think they'll find a way to play really well. You said before about they do play well for 90 minutes against Paris Saint-Germain. The pressure was on, they played well. I think it's only really Newcastle, the whole of the season, where when the pressure's on, they haven't found a way.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think, it's obviously easy for me to say sat here, but I think, the players should almost view this as an opportunity to sort of just go out and show how good you are. There's a reason that they're 12 points clear at the top of the table. And yes, they've been helped by Arsenal falling away and City falling away, but ultimately they're where they are because they deserve to be. And, I don't think certainly the performance against Newcastle didn't really do them justice. And I think, particularly in the context of how it all played out in the Goodison derby, an opportunity to go out and just play really well. It'd just be really nice. It'd be really nice for them to go out and take the game to Everton. And I agree, like John said earlier on, I think the key is getting on top. I think it's the sort of game, you assume, as you say, that Arsenal will get the win against Fulham. It's the sort of game that if you allow it to go on and, give Everton encouragement, and it gets a little bit nervy because it might get a little bit tense in the ground if things aren't going so well. I think then you can see a way where Liverpool drop points. But if they just come out sort of all guns blazing and just treat it now as just an opportunity, these next, how many games are left? 9?
9.
These next 9 games, just to sort of show what you can do and play with, you've not got that awful thing where a dropped point here or there is a nightmare. You can afford to. I'm not saying you should look to, but just try not to be burdened. As easy as it's a lot easier said than done, but try not to be burdened by all of this outside noise and the disappointment of the previous week, and just go out and play against a team who, despite the fact that they're in decent form, you're much better than.
Well, there's different ways to, you can say that Everton are unbeaten in 4, you can say they've also not won in 4. This is the draws are slippery customers who are at the best of times. I feel a little bit as though, and I think they'll know this internally when they've all come back together, I think there's a little bit where it's, if we just allow for Arsenal getting 6, Liverpool gets 6, it's then 12 points with 7 games to go. And then the 2 after it, and it's not to be complacent about anything, but the 2 after it are Leicester City and, West Ham United first, and then Leicester City away. And Leicester currently just look a mess. Maybe they'll be different after this international break. I think if I'm saying anything to this Liverpool side, I'm saying you can really bring this title home in the next 2. And you also then give Arsenal a big decision to make as well, with reference to the fact that they might still be in Europe and all the pressure that brings. I feel as though the next 2 are so important, and I almost see them. I understand why the derby's the derby and it's the first one and it's Anfield and it's in our heads. Yeah. But I almost just see them as a pair, and the manager's got to make his selections, I think, based on the idea it's a back-to-back pair.
Yeah, totally. We're talking about this break being a good thing for Liverpool, the international break coming at a good time. But I guess if you were in the Arsenal, kind of from the Arsenal perspective, or anyone else who thinks they can challenge still, it would be, well, Liverpool have had these 2 disappointments. Who knows what they'll come back like. It might have sort of made something fester. It might be coming apart. If you go and win these 2 games, it just completely kills any sort of chance, really, I think, of anyone else getting the hope that they would need, and also for us to lose the hope that we would need to lose.
It reminds me a little bit, and this sounds slightly mad because we were so far ahead, but when we came back from the pandemic and we drew a game, we played Everton then as well, and we drew it 0-0, and then you start to think, oh, well, maybe, because football was so mad, and we were something like 18 points clear or something. It might have even been more. So the fact that we were worried just shows like how mad we were and how long it been and stuff like that. But you just did have a little bit of a, well, no one knows what this footy's going to be like. And there was a Palace at home when they were just brilliant.
Yeah.
And you'd love a Palace at home this
exactly.
week. Yeah, you'd love that game where they're just like, don't worry about it, we've got this, and they just steamrolled them. And yeah, if I could get that on Wednesday, oh, Fuad.
Well, no, I thought when you were saying about that season 1920, I thought the thing you were going to say was, for me, the last vestige of a doubt was they got off the Club World Cup. And you didn't know what they were going to be like when they got back. You know, there's travel and there's been this weird thing, and there's a game in hand that was Sunday, and then they go to Leicester, and it's Leicester on Boxing Day, and Leicester was second, and then they put that performance in. Yeah. The same, I think we're talking about sort of a similar thing, but they just go, no, you don't need to worry about any of this. We're the world champions, and we've got this in our back pocket. And I think we're sort of talking about that idea. I think it would be lovely to have one of them where against Everton, where they just sort of go, you know, even if the scoreline's not as emphatic as either of those other two games, but where they just evoke that feeling of, it's all going to be all right, we've got this boxed off.
Totally. And I think also from their point of view, from our players' point of view, it's a thing of, you know, over this break and over the week before this break, you know, there was a lot of talk of you know, how good are this Liverpool side now? And it feels like, you know, this is a way for them to remind everyone that, you know, if they go on and like I said earlier, not limp over to this finish line, but completely steamroll their way through and win the league by, you know, a decent chunk, which they very well can do. And you know, if Arsenal drop off, that gap becomes even bigger. You know, that's a big kind of thing from their point of view, their pride. Obviously, the priority is getting the league done, but you know, they see it that way, I think, because they know how good they are. They've won it before, a lot of those players. There's kind of an understanding within the team about how good they are, and I think they, you know, as much as they'd like to say they don't care about outside noise and outside perceptions, we all do in some way or the other, don't we? And they would want to, you know, the ones that are going, the ones that are, you know, staying as well, really want to sort of show that, look, yeah, we may have had those disappointments, but this team is still by far the best team in this country and one of the best sides in Europe.
Make me a team selection argument. You doing anything left field? I mean, obviously, you know, Connor's fit and firing. What are your thoughts and feelings?
I think he'll go even more into the lads who he likes. I think managers tend to do that at this stage of the season. He's done a little bit of it, so I think he'll if he can play Bradley, he obviously will, because he'll want to, and it will be a full week. And so you'd imagine that he'll be able to. I think Robertson plays more or less every game between now and the end of the season. I think Canate doesn't have too much international break. I think he plays a half, and then he'll be sort of fresh as anything, which is brilliant. Virgil's, you know, played more than 2 games, which is slightly annoying because he only had 2.
It's a good trick, isn't it? He always manages to walk onto these things, Virg.
But he'd be sort of fine, and I think he goes Gravenberg, who's had a big rest as well, which is really good. He's almost had a winter break. Gravenberg, hasn't he? So I think he'd be great. Gravenberg. I think he plays McAllister. McAllister scored for Argentina as well. I think he does Sabostai. Up top is the interesting one, really.
You don't think he considers doing Jones for the first one?
No, I just think he'll just pick them 3 because they're his favourite 3, and okay. I think he'll play them Fulham as well. I just think he's not one for messing about too much. He hasn't been so far. I think he's going to be even less so between now and the end of the season. So I think he goes those 3, and I think he sees Jones as good. So up top is the interesting one for me, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he does Gakpo, Diaz, and Salah and go, because they're the 3 he's trusted the most. I think he's going to pick his most trusted players, unless one of them his leg falls off, and then he might still ask if they can hop about.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, like John said, I think the forward line is the most interesting thing. I think he will go for that with the Diaz through the middle. I think against Everton, I'd quite like him to go for one of the other 2. I'd probably go Núñez, just purely because I think it gives the defenders something to think about a little bit, and I just don't think, because he started that front 3 at Goodison, and it just didn't work.
I want him to play Diaz up against that massive lad Everton have got at right back.
Yeah.
I think that part of Gakpo's superpower is he's 6'4" and he's got to deal with fullbacks, and then he just puts them in a headlock and it's fine. He's not putting Joey O'Brien in a fucking headlock anytime soon. So I'd rather have Diaz, who can go both ways, go outside, do his head in, make it hard for him, turn him round, and Gakpo as an option. And I play Gakpo at Fulham, and I might even do the Gakpo Diaz Salah thing at Fulham. I don't think Fulham would like that very much.
Yeah.
But I just basically think at Goodison Park, one of the problems was that, you know, Liverpool could not get Gakpo into the game effectively.
No, they couldn't. And then I just also think through the middle, he just had no focal point really, and I think they could probably do with one. The midfield is it again. I suppose you can make an argument for Curtis in terms of, you know, it's a derby and he gets where it means. But again, I agree with John. I just think his favourite midfield three at the minute is Szoboszlai, McAllister and Gravenberch. So I think that's what he'll go with.
Yeah, I think that is what he will go with. I would like to see Curtis. I've just had it in my head a little bit. I think maybe probably the leftovers from the last game a little bit. Seeing him in this would be good. Do you think there's a chance he could do the four midfield thing? Probably not, right? Since he's got all the forwards back. But I'm sort of at the stage where I just don't think he fancies Núñez or Jota now that he's got all the options. I just don't think from the start at least, it feels like that when they came in to the starting lineup, it was sort of out of necessity. Whereas now, obviously, he's got them all. I wonder if he does just stick with the Diaz thing, and look to kind of, you know, bring him on when needed. If it is looking like, you know, we need that focal point and it isn't working, completely agree that didn't work in the game at Goodison. Then he might look to change it. The thing I would say is this is different. You know, this isn't there. The kind of, we said it's going to be a fight. It's going to be all those things, but I think there'll still be, you know, if things go to plan, opportunities for Liverpool to play football properly and, you know, and play through them a little bit. So yeah, I would go with the Gakpo, Diaz, Salah front three.
You know who I genuinely like to see, and it will never happen, but Chiesa. I genuinely would just be intrigued to see what he'd do. And because I think every time he's been on the pitch, he's either scored or he's assisted or he's looked a little bit dangerous, bar that one at Plymouth when everyone was just absolutely dreadful. But I'd throw him in there.
What happened to Plymouth? Do you think they broke down on the way or something? Like, honestly,
just too far away.
Just had a mad 2 hours on the side of the motorway, just like doing each other's head in.
Just knock around at the services.
Honestly, just don't shit this.
I don't know, the alternative is that they had a great break at Gloucester services.
All dead full of lovely bread.
Yeah, ate like kings, bounced around the place.
Yeah, got knocked out the FA Cup, but swatted some Scotch eggs.
Honestly, the quality of the Scotch eggs, the size of them, Diaz was a gog when he got into the services.
It's bigger than me head, he kept saying.
Never fucking seen the likes. Yeah. Look at these, he says in Baracas. All right.
We'll have to wait for the book. Yeah, who's doing the book of the season?
Yeah, absolutely, Beth. I'm not doing this one. There is. They're going to beat the Blues.
Yeah, I think so. I think they'll win both games.
Yes, yeah, I've gone with that. I think they will as well.
Yeah, let's be positive. Why not?
I like the positivity. I suspect they might end up only with 4 points. I've had a thing about Fulham. I think Fulham are the sort of team that gets something against Liverpool.
4's fine.
4 would be absolutely fine, especially if the 3 came in the first one. I think it would be absolutely fine. I've just got this idea of Marco Silva just sat there thinking, yeah, but watch this.
They got London Derby midweek though.
Yeah, they have.
The 87th of the season.
I'm not saying I'm not 100% that Arsenal are getting 6. I mean, I keep saying we've got to act like Arsenal are getting 6. I'm not 100% that Arsenal are getting 6.
Who have they got at the weekend?
The Everton.
Oh yeah, I'm working that game. It's great to know that I'm
ESPN's Beth Lindop, ladies and gentlemen, on top of the detail.
Take a Scotch egg
all the way through. Worth having. You never know if you're going to need them. Listen, on Hillsborough Law right now, and you haven't got to listen, you can always fast forward on these matters. Just to be crystal clear, always important to look after yourself in any way, shape or form. But here's me speaking to Debbie and Elkan. Atkinson, joined by Elkan Abrahamson, who is the director of Hillsborough Law, and Brony Jackson-Cantor, and campaign director for Hillsborough Law. I've got Debbie Caine with me as well to talk about what's broken down in the last week or so, Elkan, but breaking down the process. And part of what is trying to be achieved here in amongst the umbrella concept, which is called Hillsborough Law, is to bring about a situation where we have a duty of candour for people in public life and equality of what gets called arms, which is best to be seen as resources as and when these cases and inquests come to be in court, etc., etc. Let's talk about first and foremost why that matters. Duty of candour in public life, I think, ought to be backed by the legal system. Why is this so important to Hillsborough Law?
So I can give you a few examples. Hillsborough itself is obvious. We know how police officers and others lied in the aftermath of the tragedy and then covered up those lies over the decades. And a duty of candour would have prevented that. But more recently, the contaminated blood inquiry, where Andy Burnham in Parliament in effect lied, and says now that he was lied to by civil servants, so the duty of candour would have extended to those civil servants, so he would have been properly informed and wouldn't have given false information to Parliament. Almost every tragedy that we look at, post office inquiry, again, people lying, COVID-19 inquiry, people lying to the inquiry, never mind to other investigations. And what the duty of candour would do is say, whenever there's an investigation, it's the duty of every public officer involved, not just to tell the truth if asked, but also to come forward voluntarily.
It's worth just sort of trying to emphasise, that's such a significant cultural shift. At the moment, organisations, all organisations, but organisations that have a responsibility directly to the public, they feel as though they've got the responsibility directly to the organisation itself first. The cultural shift that needs to be legally underpinned is that idea that actually, no, your duty is to the truth, your duty is to what you know, the duty is to your best possible information for the wider public from minute one. And I think that whenever I've sort of looked into many of these things, one of the things I've noticed is ordinary people are left trying to work out what on earth's gone on. And organisations' first instinct is to protect the organisation and not to enlighten ordinary people.
Mm. And there is a reason for that I think we need to understand if we're going to change the culture. When you join a large organisation, that organisation trains you to be loyal to it. And it has to. I mean, if it's an army, for instance, where there are matters of life and death, you have to train your soldiers to protect their colleagues. At what point do you persuade the soldier that you stop protecting that colleague? And obviously, if there's a war crime, that, for instance, should be a point where you stop protecting the colleague. But it is, I can understand why people find it difficult to make that transition to covering their buddies' backs to suddenly exposing them. But it's necessary to draw the line.
This cultural shift is something that instinctively, therefore, as someone who's running the campaign, Debbie, you've got to be conscious that you're walking into the current cultural issue at every single step of the way. The civil service, in any one of its departmental aspects, will have people in there who will see the first responsibility already being to the civil service, being to the department, being to something like that. So trying to push and put something together about this, which brings that cultural shift into play, is an enormous task. And for it to have fallen after promises have been made so early must be disappointing in one sense, but also in another sense, there must have been part of you that was a little bit ready for this battle.
Yeah, I mean, when obviously we were promised twice by Keir Starmer that they were going to implement a Hillsborough Law at both conferences and then the King's speech, when they were in the shadow government, we actually said to people in that team, be ready for when you do go into government, they will be ready for you. And it was like kind of, like the attitude was like, I was like a conspiracy theorist and you're a bit nuts. And then when they went in, a few people I've spoken to have gone, oh my God, they literally just do that to you and pull you in. And then before you know it, they're giving you all reasons for why you can't have what you want. And you can't do that, Minister, and you can't do that, and blah, blah, blah. And then before you know it, they're making the decisions and they don't know how they ended up there. And it's because it's that this government is quite new as well. So we take it back, we take that into account when they're dealing with a new organisation, but we did know it was going to come, and the same people we feel are the same people that worked under the previous government and since before have already started that seed of doubt.
Yeah.
And we do have a lot of sympathy for the current government on that one. So all we want to do is work with everyone to get it to the point where we need it to be, but we did expect it. There's still our campaigns, as you know, we've got there's so many of us, the toxic veterans, for instance, and contaminated blood, and all the smaller ones who haven't got the large group of people that, Hillsborough does have, individuals from mental health institutions or death in peace custody. They're all going through it now, still, and it's still happening. So it's just trying to bring it into context, really.
The context, I think the key context, Elkan, in terms of duty of candour, and we'll come on to equality of arms in a second, is this is still happening. It's really important to put this out there. The COVID-19 inquiry, which I know that you've worked on, this is stuff that is happening now in public life. This is not a historic thing, in part because the campaigns have kept and keep pushing for the idea for there to be greater candour about each of their campaigns, but also, COVID-19 was an enormous thing that happened to us very, very recently. In tons of ways, it's still ongoing in and of itself. But this stuff is constantly brought back to the forefront of British public life. There's just been the contaminated blood settlement, which has come out, which is very good news for that campaign, but they're still part of this campaign because they understand how important getting a duty of candour is.
Yeah, and to give you another example, the Southport inquiry, which hasn't started yet, is going to have issues on duty of candour where the question will be to what extent the security services and the Prevent scheme worked. And you can already see the Ministry of Defence and the police are going to be saying, oh, we can't discuss these details with you because they're highly confidential and national security and so on. But they use that as a cloak to mask their own inefficiencies.
Yeah.
I don't mind if there are issues which cannot be discussed because of national security, and I understand that. But if they've cocked up, I'd like them to admit it, even if they can't give full details as to how they cocked up.
Just on that idea of, let's use cocked up as a phrase, really, I feel as though one of the things that I feel, in part because of our wider political sort of discourse, the way in which it's changed and shifted, I think that I understand why there might be a defensive sort of organisational desire to try to not have phrases like cocked up thrown out in public on the one hand. But on the other hand, Tony Evans has repeatedly argued that an inability to learn from Hillsborough because of cover-ups is one of the things that leads to being so many deaths in the Manchester bombings, is because we weren't able to be open about what had happened. And it means that you're in a situation where the cover-up becomes more important than the learning. And the learning doesn't have to be constantly about pointing fingers. It can be that the structures haven't been right, that this needs to improve, that the guidance needs to change, legislation needs to be different. It seems to me as though that constant defensiveness actually goes on to endanger more lives in the future.
Absolutely. And there is an interesting question as to whether in some cases you either get accountability or you get a proper, honest examination of what went wrong, but you can't have both. And what do you do when you're in that situation? And we haven't begun to think about that really as a society.
I think the next phase of this, Debbie, becomes therefore about the equality argument. It's interesting because you mentioned before about a couple of the smaller groups, and it's worth saying there's so many groups that have come to be part of the push for Hillsborough Law. It's one of the best things that Andy Burnham did starting this process, was to include so many groups in the tent. But many of them just have not had the resources that, the Hillsborough families haven't always had those resources, let's be clear, but we're able to finally draw on. That ability for ultimately everyone who ends up caught up in some sort of tragedy, for them to have, it doesn't have to be the biggest resources in the world, it just has to be equal.
Yeah.
Clive from the Contaminated Blood campaign once, I thought, made an excellent point that I heard, where he said, well, it might not be about raising other people's ceilings, it might be about pushing other people's, raising other people's floors, sorry. It might be about pushing other people's ceilings down and saying, well, you, in defence, you can't spend any more than that.
Yeah.
But the point being is that equality is the most important thing, especially for the smaller groups.
And the thing is the bill that's being kind of paused at the moment, that we're still waiting to hear about, is that didn't address it at all. I don't even
Not in the slightest.
Not in the slightest. So it was, I don't even think they've looked at it, and the legal aid factor hasn't changed. So the NHS, anyone who's gone into any situation with the NHS, defence, anyone else, the only ones it benefits, who already sadly benefit from, if you call it that, is death in police custody, disasters and terrorist attacks. And I think they were talking about local authority, but as they'd already reached the ceiling that they get legal aid anyway. So anyone who's had any issues with the NHS, maternity scandals, Lucy Letby type stuff, contaminated blood, nothing's changed for them. And they haven't mentioned parity at all. I think they've asked questions of departments who haven't responded, and they haven't even begun to discuss that. So unless something major's happened in the last week, I don't know. That's not involved at the moment.
Elkan, has someone's been on the other side, literally, of this parity question, where you felt as though one group has an enormous amount of resources? I always remember there was something that came out of the panel verdict where all the documents were released, and in a 6-month period in 1989 the FA had spent almost £200,000 on photocopying alone, when everyone else was trying to just work out what on earth was going on. That parity point is so crucially important, isn't it?
Absolutely, and we have to remember most of the money that's spent on legal fees and other costs is our money. It's public money. It's not like private companies are spending the shareholders' money, which is one thing. It's all these public bodies like health authorities, local authorities, and so on, that are using our money, our taxpayers' money, to cover their own arses, basically. And what we want to do is for some supervision. There's no oversight at all of that at the moment. Someone, and it would normally be the chair of the inquiry or the coroner, to say, first of all, why are there 10 teams of QCs here? Do you not have something in common that you can narrow that down? And how much are you spending on it? Maybe spend less. So from our point of view, it's a money-saving initiative.
I think that therefore throws open with what's going to happen next with trying to get the law together, trying to get the bill together, for it to get passed into law, Elkan. There's a little bit of a ticking clock because of promises that have been made, but almost parking the idea of a ticking clock for a second, there's the idea that it has to be right. Because back to the idea of resource, the last thing that anyone wants is for this still to be going on, for all of these groups something to be put in front of Parliament that's not fit for purpose. Again, the resource question in terms of people's time, campaigners' time. People think at times that campaigners love campaigning. That is just not the case. People don't want to be brought through this over and over again. I think what you'd probably be pushing for now is a really calm, level-headed, let's get it right first time from this point.
Yeah.
We met with the families of all the campaign groups online last Tuesday evening, and we need to do another one because we couldn't fit them all into the, you know what it's like with trying to get them all in a room on a Zoom, and we shared a lot of the information that we know that we're trying to work through with the government, and they were devastated when they had the idea of literally thinking that this government's like the cavalry that's coming over the hill. With, so people don't have to ever go through that again, what they've been through. They don't do it for themselves because they know it's too late for them. Yeah. But the idea that their work over the last 36 years and beyond, contaminated blood and all the others have been going on longer, toxic veterans as well, that it's all been in vain for them. They were devastated. So we're trying to manage expectations for that, but I personally don't think we can do it for much longer if someone doesn't give. And they keep saying that our bill's not workable as it is, which is kind of what we're getting back. But
you've drafted a bill.
Yeah.
And so, and you work with Pete Wilkinson on that.
Weatherby.
Pete Weatherby. Sorry, Pete. Apologies, Pete Weatherby.
Sorry, Pete.
It's all right. It's absolutely fine. It's my fault. I know where I got Wilkinson from. There is, I've at least got the right initial. There is that bill, it's not to say that it will be necessarily perfect, Elkan. I'm sure you want to stand by it, but that is ready to be there as and when they would want to work with that.
Yeah, and I hoped, I guess, when the government produced its first version of the bill, it would be at least have some echoes of the one we drafted. But there was no duty of candour, no duty of cooperation, and nothing about parity of funding. It was just like, well, one of the people, I haven't seen it, one of the people who saw it went through it and then said, where's the rest? There is no rest, that's it. It's not Hillsborough Law. Yeah.
What are we doing next then?
Well, we're hoping that to work over the next couple of days rather than weeks with the government, because the anniversary is coming up next week, and they did promise that there'll be a bill on the table for the anniversary. So that's all I can say at this matter, is that we're hoping that we're going to get the bill that we've signed up for. But until then, no one knows what's next. Really, it's in their court.
Okay, we'll share it still gone.
Sorry, we'd also hope for a bit of cooperation, because the way this bill has been drawn up, and it's not a typical way to draw up bills, is that the people who are most concerned about it have been completely excluded from the process, to the extent that they say don't publish a report until the bill's out. And when the bill was shown to people, it was shown under the most secure of circumstances. No one could take notes, no one could take photos or anything, no one could have a copy. I've not been allowed to see it. And I just don't understand this attitude from the government. Why not cooperate? We're the experts, we can actually help them.
Especially on cancer.
Yeah, and they don't want to hear from us.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep you informed as and when there are things that they do want you to hear from or share all the way through. Everything that you need through the Anfield Wrap on this and everywhere else as well, to keep a really good eye on the Liverpool Echo and the Daily Mirror as well. Been lots of good stuff there about all of this all the way through. Thank you very much to Elkan. Thank you very much to Debbie. Hopefully more good news soon. All right, excellent stuff. Thank you very much indeed to Debbie and Elkan for coming in. Just want to give a shout out to everyone who came to see us in Australia. Thank you very much. It was excellent. Really enjoyed it. So thank you if you did come and see us. Also, point out that it's a good time to subscribe to the Anfield Wrap too.
I would say a great time.
Would you say a great time? Yeah. If you've been thinking about it, now would be the move. Because
almost ideal.
Yep, there's a run-in. There's 2 games this week. There's a run-in. There's everything that you need across the next couple of weeks just to get us all psyched up. It does feel like something is on the horizon, something special is on the horizon for the football club as a whole. And then from there as well, there's then the beginning of the planning for next season, which I just love how much everyone's already into. It's like, I know I don't mean this, I genuinely don't mean this cynically. I feel as though there's a real appetite for everyone just to bounce into the summer and bounce
next year.
I think that it's there at this crucial moment. So I think it's worth looking forward to enjoying that as well. So if you've been thinking about it, now will be an excellent time to do it. You can do it through the app. You can do it at theanfieldwrap.com/subscribe. And there'll be other ways and means as well. If you only want the videos, you can do it solely through YouTube. You can do it through Spotify. But to be clear, if you go for either of them, you only get the bits that's on them, and we can't link it up because YouTube and Spotify are well bigger than us, and they set the terms of engagement. To be crystal clear, we can't push YouTube around, John. No. I know Craig's tried, but they're only having it their way. Other thing that is, obviously we've done lots of stuff, everyone's done lots of stuff discussing Trent Alexander-Arnold and the contract. It's going to continue to come, I think, across the next few days and weeks, so we'll park that for now. I want to talk about the Malaga and the multi-club ownership. I've got Fuad, Beth and John for all of this. First, I just want to get your views on multi-club ownership. It's one of the things that people always say you don't talk about very much. John, what are your views on multi-club ownership?
It feels like something I'm instinctively against. But it's sort of something that, you know, when you feel like you can't fight everything, and I feel like that at the moment with football and modern football, to sort of use that term, I just sort of feel like you've got to pick your battles, or otherwise you end up exhausted. And maybe that's what they want, and maybe they exhaust you on purpose a little bit, these people, but it doesn't feel like that this is something I've got the energy for a huge fight for at the moment. It just feels like it's a bit shit, and I just think how it can end up looking is different. And I've done, been to some talks on multi-club ownership and spoken to different people about it. There's something that come out a couple of weeks ago with John Culligan that for subscribers, which is really good on the audio, where I spoke to him about it being attractive for different reasons. It's obvious to me why FSG wants it, and it's to help Liverpool, and it's a player thing, and it's this idea of, rather than bidding £100 million for Caicedo and then missing out on him, it's, can we take Caicedo, put him somewhere else while he A, gets a work permit, and B, gets better and gets experience, and then we take him for what we decide what he's going for, because we own both clubs. And so I think they're looking at it from a point of view of, how do we get ahead? How do we stay ahead? We're ahead at the moment. Look at the league table. But how do we sort of stay ahead of sort of everyone else, really? And how do we compete with teams who maybe don't have to worry as much as we do about spending £100 million on a player and then not even getting him? And so I think it's, you can see why they sort of want to do it. Just another club, at another famous club, and another club which means so much to the fans of that city or town or whatever, effectively becoming a bit of a feeder club for another team, a bigger team, even that team is yours, just sort of doesn't sit right with me. But then this might be first world problems. I'm speaking to a Malaga fan tomorrow, a Malaga season ticket holder. It's someone that a subscriber put me in touch with, so thanks a lot. And I'm speaking to him, and he might say, John, we're going to the wall. I'd just like some people who know what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? And so there might be a little bit of a case of people looking at FSG, and whether some listeners like it or not, other people within football think FSG are good owners, like other people who aren't necessarily worried, about Liverpool's transfer business, see them as responsible owners and owners who are able to run a club sustainably. Sustainability might not be sexy, but there's a lot of people who are looking at their football clubs as thinking, I wouldn't mind a bit of that, because they've been, for a few years from what I gather, and like I say, I'll find out more tomorrow, from what I gather, worried about their sort of very existence. And so I think you can be a little bit patronising if you're not careful to other fans and tell them, oh, surely they won't want this. Like, maybe in some cases that they do, but I know in other situations, the City group's an interesting one. You know, it's worked out pretty well for Girona. I know that they're not doing as well this season, but they qualified for the Champions League. For the French club, they're almost right. And I mean, the French are good at that. Fair play to them. You know, they get the pots and pans out and make it in. But I think, you know, it's worked out less well, and so. Yeah, I guess in a roundabout way, I'm saying it's a little bit shit, but on the list of things I think it was shit about football, it's probably 4th or 5th.
Yeah, I agree with Joe. I feel I've said that a lot today. I agree with you.
I'm a very agreeable man.
Yeah. It sort of falls into that bracket of, it's almost like the antithesis of what Liverpool stand for. But John mentioned sort of not, how do you get ahead? And I think as well for FSG, it's maybe almost thinking, how do we not fall behind? You know, you look at, you know, Chelsea, City, there's so many clubs that are already doing this that I think FSG maybe think...
Everton?
Yeah. And
albeit the other way around.
And I know people who are against it will think that, well, just because other people are doing it doesn't mean that we have to. You know, it's the same with things like price rises and things like that. You want your club to be the standard bearer and to be setting the example, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it probably isn't the hill to die on for me. But I mean, obviously people are entitled to their opinion, and I think as well a lot of it depends on how things go. You know, indeed, if they do buy Malaga and help transform their fortunes, and yeah, that might benefit Liverpool, but ultimately if that makes life better for the supporters of their club, then that's not a bad thing. If they don't treat the club well, if they don't, you know, if it purely becomes about serving Liverpool, then it's a different argument. I think on the face of it, I'd rather they didn't do it, but if they do it and they do it in a responsible way, then I'm not totally opposed to it.
Yeah, my initial kind of instinctive thought was exactly like Beth there, with it being it's already in motion. People are already doing it, and I think the big thing we've seen with football is if you don't kind of stay with the trends, if you like, then you get left behind very, very quickly. Whether that's using data, whatever it is, you know, the staff you keep at a football club.
It's weird. One thing I would say is there's a number of clubs who are doing it and have been doing it around the world. I would sort of point out that other than Manchester City, I'm struggling to see them all sweeping the board with the trophies. I think you can keep saying you get left behind, and I can understand why that might be a logical conclusion people would draw. But right now, for instance, well, we're first and Arsenal are second, and as far as I know, Arsenal haven't got one in this league at the minute. I don't think Real Madrid have got one. I could be wrong. It's interesting, Paris Saint-Germain are looking at Malaga as well. All the owners of Paris Saint-Germain are looking at Malaga as well. That
could be for different reasons.
Could be for different reasons for all we. But Bayern Munich got one. I don't think. So I think that there's we want to say those cliches, but I just think it's important from time to time to sort of investigate them a little bit. But instinctively.
Yeah, no, I totally take that on board. I think the thing is the intentions behind it a lot of the time. So to me, it feels like, obviously City have used it in ways with their academy and with bringing players in. Not there hasn't been big success stories necessarily, but maybe there have been in terms of selling them on and making a profit that way. But it seems like they want a presence in New York. They want a presence in other cities. It's more of a brand thing rather than what it feels like with FSG, which is a purely sporting way. And I think a lot of it probably comes from the thing of, Caicedo is a good example. A lot of Liverpool fans were saying, well, why, or general football fans saying, why didn't a bigger club find someone like him? We've all got great scouts. Why didn't they kind of get him in when he was still cheap? The problem is when you compete at the highest level, you can't afford to necessarily take those risks and give them the time on the pitch that it takes for them to kind of emerge as, the 140 million pound Caicedo that he ended up being. And I think that's where this comes in, and where Liverpool probably really see it as an opportunity is we can take those gambles a bit more in these places. The thing, the fan of me, general football fan of me, that does think a little bit that if you are a Malaga and you're in a position where you are quite desperate if you're a fan by the sounds of how things are over there, both in terms of on the pitch and off the pitch. Is this a thing where you are being taken advantage of? Like you should be able to have more hope than just take anything that comes purely because you're desperate.
I'm just starting to think, Fuad, me and you should go to Malaga.
I think we should investigate this, John.
Bring your camera. I mean, it's screaming ESPN, this piece as well.
Yeah.
So we'll all go and we'll find out.
first person story.
Yeah, we'll do a lot of digging.
Yeah, mainly in bars and restaurants.
Under the fingernails, I call it, Fuad. That kind of reporting, under the fingernails.
I mean, it's markedly, notoriously a port as well. There's a big harbour, a big bay.
There's still stuff. It's right itself. This bit.
I just feel like you
They've
can't.
got Gormleys.
You need to add texture to this, don't you? You need to sort of sample the local culture and sort of soak up the vibes. Yeah.
I think you can. But just I'll sort of sum it up. You can. I think you can make. I think the problem with it is, John. I'm both instinctively against and sort of intellectually against. I think in the long run, it is bad for football. I think it's. I genuinely think in the long run, when you go all the way through, there's different ways of doing it. Fuad's right to say that the City Football Group thing feels as much about a branding exercise. The Red Bull thing, ironically, whilst it's obviously a massive branding exercise for Red Bull on the one hand, does feel as though it's actually got more of an integrated football network thing going on that underpins it a little bit. Maybe I'm wrong to think that, but I don't quite think I am. Without sort of, again, talking against myself, because I do think in the long run this is not good news for association football. But I do feel as though Malaga do just simply look like a good candidate in a couple of ways. If I try to be objective about it, and I do think that there are parallels. I do think the Port thing does matter. I do think the idea of there's been at least an element of recent glories that could be resurrected do matter. They get a good crowd. Malaga is a very, it's a very, very cosmopolitan. Yeah, in the end, I can end up doing a bit of a Scouse thing and saying, "Oh, it's a bit of us, this," if I'm not careful, and that's not what they're thinking in Boston. To be crystal clear, it's not. Michael Edwards isn't ticking that box, but you can begin to make the argument. I just think that I'm scared that by making the arguments, you end up giving it your blessing.
Yeah, no, I completely understand where you're coming from with that, and like I say, I've been to, I went to the Finance Summit, the FT one down in London, and there was a bit of talk around that, and there was people just making financial arguments for it and say, well, the unpredictability of football, and if you own one football club and they do badly, then you lose money. Whereas if you own four and three of them do well and one of them does badly, then you're all right. And everyone's like, oh yeah, that's smart. And there's the shared learning and all these things. The sort of come from it. The idea of the more, you learn how a football club works and then sort of operates another one and stuff like that. But I always just think, yeah, but what about the one that's doing shit? Do you know what I mean? It feels like the idea of you throw enough spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, and then. But it's not spaghetti, it's football clubs that matter a lot to people and matter a lot to the people of those places, and the ones that fall behind, is it a bit like, well, they're cast aside a little bit? Like, it feels like that's happened a little bit with the City Group stuff. It's like, oh, it don't matter, the other ones are doing well. Well, it matters to the people who live there, and it matters to the people of Malaga that their sort of team's doing well. And if FSG are going to buy them, I genuinely want them to give a fuck about it, and that could be almost to the detriment of Liverpool, because there's only so many things you can care about. But that's just who I am as a person. I think that's just who a lot of us are as a person. Like, if they are going to buy it, like, I want them to be invested in its success, not just because, it might sort of help Liverpool in the long term, because they might develop some good players, but I just think it's the right thing to do.
In all seriousness, if they bought them, would you want to go and see them?
I don't. Jokes aside, with our man and Fuad's cultural trip,
some will call it exchange.
I don't think I'd be that bothered. No, I don't think I'd be. I wouldn't necessarily support them, but you would take a passing interest. From a point of view, if there's a 21-year-old doing well there, you'd be like, well, is he on our way to Liverpool? And again, that's a bit shit, because you think, well, Malaga, any good players are hoovered up by Liverpool, but then a Malaga fan might sit here and say, well, it makes a difference from Real Madrid and Barcelona, lad. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's already this pecking order in football sort of already exists. You just sort of changing it a little bit. So I'd want them to do well, but going to see them. I mean, listen, if Mick books flights, I'll go. But
especially in December.
but yeah, I don't think we're getting a scarf up in the studio, are we? Not quite.
No, not yet. I think what John was just saying there, like, it sort of makes it really kind of explicit the kind of the limit of your ambitions almost. So, like,
you feel like we're limited Malaga's ever ambitions.
Yeah, because this feels like a really ugly sort of like sign that this is sort of as far as you will get, because it's already kind of unspoken. Like if Malaga were completely as they are now, and they went got promoted, and then they finished in Europe in La Liga in a couple of years, they would be in somewhat gutted their squad, wouldn't it? It would be you'd have people being sold all over the place. That's just sort of the nature of the pecking order, like John said. This just feels like a really there's like a really obvious club that are going to take your players, or at least the purpose of your whole enterprise feels a lot more kind of explicitly
It is
clear.
interesting, because you're almost like you're raising the floor, but you're installing a ceiling.
Exactly.
And so would you rather live there or in a house that's falling apart? But the sky's the limit.
Tell you what.
You've just made two. I mean, that one about the spaghetti.
The spaghetti didn't make any sense to anybody.
No, come on, the spaghetti.
I loved it, yeah.
Thanks, Fuad.
No, I thought
I'm not saying whether or not we liked it or didn't like it. It's just how often are you throwing spaghetti at a wall
To see what sticks?
I just
We're
thought
putting
it
that
was
quote up.
the way he said it was just so emotive. Like there was just a real sadness as he said, "It's not spaghetti."
It's not spaghetti.
On a t-shirt.
Beth, it's not spaghetti.
And that the floor and ceiling one was incredible.
I think the floor and ceiling one was different class. It's the spaghetti one I've got problems with.
That's the new one for the office wall, that.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you're up till half 12 in the night writing essays on people in performance.
There you are.
That's what I was doing. This master's got a lot to answer for.
Did you have a bowl of spaghetti?
A lot to
I did
answer
not.
for.
He threw it all at the wall.
It's got nothing in
To
it.
see what stick.
Yeah, Laura's disgusted.
By the way, you've got to cook it first.
Yeah,
Don't try with dry spaghetti, it just breaks.
it's a waste of time.
Yeah, wasted. None of it sticks.
All right then.
Poor spaghetti fans crying on the floor.
I think that'll do is you can take that one away with you. Along
There'll be
with
more of this from me and the Malaga fan tomorrow. His head's going to be battered.
doesn't know where to go. And also sustainability is not sexy. Write that one down as well.
That's the masters again.
There we are. Excellent stuff indeed. Thank you very much to John Gibbons. Feel free to make a book of these if you want. Beth, Lindop, Fuad, Hasan. If you've watched it, Patrick's looked after the images. If you've listened to it, and by the way, I hope that you have, at least until the last 5 minutes. And he's looked after the noises that have come out of people's mouths. It is the Anfield Wrap this week. There's so much to look forward to. Wednesday's going to be absolutely enormous. Sunday's going to be absolutely enormous, and 6 points. And Liverpool are on the verge of the promised land.